Commissioner Gordon, Bane has escaped.
There is a voice that lives inside your head, and it is not your friend. It wears your tone, it borrows your language, but it is not you. It's the parasite that survived every moment you folded, every time you hesitated, every instance you handed over power for comfort. You think it's caution, but it's corrosion. You think it's self-awareness, but it's self-sabotage dressed in concern. It doesn't scream. It whispers, tells you you're tired when you're just uncommitted, tells you you're overwhelmed when you're just under-prioritized. It doesn't want you to die, it wants you to decay slowly, quietly, without resistance. That's why you must fight it, with every rep, every sentence, every act of deliberate discomfort. Not to kill it, but to starve it. Because if you don't, it eats you alive in plain sight. It waits for the perfect moment. Not when you're at your worst, but when you're almost at your best. When you're one decision away from doing something hard. It doesn't want to stop you at rock bottom. It wants to stop you at takeoff. Because that's where it loses control. That's when it starts to panic. It feeds on inertia. It thrives in hesitation. And every time you pause, it builds another chain. Not a heavy one. Not obvious. Just light enough that you don't notice how slowly you're becoming obedient. You don't fight that voice with optimism. You fight it with violence. Strategic, cold, internal violence. Discipline so brutal that your own brain is afraid to interrupt it. That's how you fight back. That's how you reclaim the throne it quietly stole. It has studied you longer than anyone. It knows your weaknesses. It knows your patterns, and it uses you against you. You want to get up early. It reminds you how little sleep you got. You want to stay on task. It suggests you just take 5 minutes to rest. 5 minutes becomes a morning. A morning becomes a month. That voice doesn't ruin your life in one move. It erodes your ambition molecule by molecule. And the most terrifying part, it sounds reasonable. That's the trap. It never sounds like sabotage. It sounds like balance, like self-care, like maybe later. If you don't catch it in the moment and confront it like an enemy, you become it. And once that voice wins, it doesn't need to talk anymore. Because now it's the one moving your hands, walking your feet, living your life. You must build a version of yourself that the voice fears. Not the one that negotiates. Not the one that compromises, the one that acts in spite of that voice. That's your real self, the one that trains while tired, writes when uninspired, moves forward while doubting, not because it feels good, but because it must. That man is rare, because most men only act when the voice agrees. They wait for alignment, they wait for confidence, they wait to feel ready, and by the time that voice gives permission, the window is gone. The moment has passed. And that man, he's forgotten. You want to be remembered. You want to dominate your domain. Then act like someone who doesn't trust his own mind unless it's earned. Let your standards speak louder than your thoughts. The voice cannot survive momentum. That's the trick. When you move fast enough, often enough, it gets quieter. Not because it's gone, but because it's ignored. The man who wakes and works before that voice gets a word in. He becomes untouchable, because now the voice is reacting to him. That's the shift. You stop being the one listening and start being the one leading. And it's not loud, it's surgical. You don't scream at the voice, you starve it. You don't argue, you outwork. You wake up, you act, you execute. And with every unbroken routine, every promise kept, the voice loses jurisdiction. You've outgrown it. Not emotionally, but operationally. You think it'll ever fully disappear. It won't. That voice is ancient. It's instinctual. It was designed for survival, not sovereignty. It was born in caves, trained to detect risk, built to preserve, not evolve. And if you follow it long enough, you live like a species, not a soul. But you weren't born just to survive. You were born to impose on the world, on your limits, on your name. And to do that, you must override the architecture. Build a manual override into your own biology. That means the moment the voice says rest, you double down. The moment it says, you've done enough, you do one more. The moment it says, nobody's watching, you remind it you are. That's when the rewiring begins. That's how you change the story. It wants you to be reasonable. That's how it wins. It wants you to play fair with your potential, to trade your greatness for comfort. And it will always make that trade sound noble, like you're taking care of yourself, like you're not pushing too hard. But ask yourself, when has that voice ever pushed you to be more? When has it ever said, go anyway? Never, because it has no vision, no dreams. It only sees the present discomfort. So you must become the visionary in your own mind, the one who sees the cost of listening, the one who sees the hell that will grow if you keep choosing easy. Every time you listen, you reinforce it. Every time you disobey, you chip away at its power. This is not self-help. This is a siege. Some people meditate to quiet the voice. That's fine. But silence is not the goal. The goal is order. You don't want to be empty. You want to be armed, mentally armed, emotionally trained, so that when the voice speaks, you don't panic. You smirk, because you've heard it all before, and you know it loses when the calendar is followed, when the rituals are kept, when the discipline stays intact, no matter what tone it uses. That's the art. To outlast your own emotional sabotage, you do it long enough and that voice doesn't disappear. It changes. It starts echoing your standards, because now it's no longer the dominant one. You are. You cannot outsource this war. No book will defeat it for you. No mentor, no quote, no app. The only thing that kills that voice is consequence. Real, painful, daily consequence. The kind you inflict on yourself. Miss the workout. Cold shower. Skip the routine. Extra hour of work. The voice learns when it pays a price. Until then, it's just playing. But the day it realizes you're serious, that you fight back, that you hold yourself accountable harder than any coach ever could, that's when it starts backing down. That's when it recalculates. Because now it knows it's dealing with someone dangerous, someone who turns every whisper into a war plan. Your brain does not care about your dreams. It cares about survival, efficiency, conservation, and it has one commandment etched into its circuitry: avoid unnecessary expenditure. So every time you stand at the edge of a decision that demands greatness, your mind rings the same alarm it did for predators in the wild. Danger. Not because the task is fatal, but because the energy required threatens your comfort. That's the ancient deception. You think hesitation means risk, but what it really means is growth. You weren't built to chase glory by default. You were built to stay safe. But greatness does not dwell in safety. It hides behind acts that feel like rebellion. And that rebellion, that's the energy your brain was designed to resist. Your nervous system treats ambition like fire. Beautiful, but fatal if held too long. It floods your bloodstream with cortisol at the first sign of pressure, makes your heart race, narrows your focus, whispers that it's too much, too fast, too far. And if you've never trained for that moment, you'll believe it. You'll walk away thinking the discomfort was a signal to stop. But discomfort is not danger, it's data. It's your evolutionary script resisting rewrite. The bold move feels like death because the brain sees change as annihilation of the known, and to it, the known equals life. But to a man who wants to build something beyond average, that script is the enemy. You don't fight it with motivation. You fight it with exposure, repetition. You teach your mind that intensity does not mean instability. You reprogram instinct by defying it. Understand this, you are hardwired to play small, not because you lack courage, but because your biology defaults to safety. Your brain prefers predictability, routine, repetition. Anything else demands energy it would rather not spend. It doesn't want you to lift heavier, speak louder, move faster, dare further. It wants you to remain, but you were not born to remain, you were born to become. And becoming costs energy. It costs stability. And so every great decision, the business launch, the fight, the discipline to show up when you're drained, feels like trespassing. Because you are. You are breaking into a territory your brain told you never to enter, and the boldness that sets men apart. It is not natural. It is trained defiance of the biological fear that masks as reason. The myth they sold you is that great men feel different, that they don't doubt, that they're built for pressure. But that's a lie. They feel the same chemical resistance you do, the same pulse quicken, the same voice say, wait. The difference is, they recognize the voice. They don't debate with it. They expect it. Because the bold move always triggers the warning system. It always sets off the alarms. But they don't turn back. They smile. Because they know what it means. They've reached the edge of their old life. And they step through anyway. Not because it's easy, but because they're not trying to be safe. They're trying to be real. And real power requires discomfort on command. The brain is lazy, not because it's broken, but because it's efficient. And efficiency is the enemy of expansion. So it fights boldness like it's disease. It floods you with rationalizations, makes excuses look noble, convinces you that now's not the time, that more preparation is needed, that waiting makes you smarter. But boldness is not reckless. Boldness is execution in spite of imagined risk, because most risks aren't real. They're phantoms, born in the shadows of your evolutionary biology. You want to rewire your life. Then you have to act before the fear finishes its sentence. That's what separates men who move from men who dream. The ones who wait for alignment never leave the harbor. The ones who go anyway build empires in the storm. You need to understand how deeply the system fights change, your habits, designed to repeat, your thoughts, biased toward confirmation, your feelings anchored in memory. And so when you try to upgrade, your schedule, your circle, your standards, your brain panics, sends warnings, screams for neutrality. And this is where most people fail. They think the resistance means the plan is wrong. But resistance means you've found the edge, the threshold, and the only way through is to burn more energy than you're used to. That's the tax. That's the toll. You don't get better without fatigue. You don't get sharper without stress. And you don't get bolder without resistance. So when it hits, lean in. The feeling of danger is proof of proximity to evolution. Your evolution is locked behind moves that feel unsustainable, because they are, for the old you. And the brain doesn't want the old you to die. It wants it preserved. It wants comfort maintained. It wants the same thoughts, same triggers, same inputs. But when you starve it of the familiar and flood it with demand, it malfunctions. And in that malfunction you emerge, the one who no longer needs permission, the one who acts while others hesitate. That's why boldness is feared. It's not just action, it's transformation. And transformation threatens identity. Most people will die as their past, but the few who fight through the warning signals, they forge new selves, not with epiphanies, but with brutal, repeated defiance of mental safety. You don't break through by feeling ready. You break through by violating the script. You wake up earlier when your brain says no. You speak when your hands shake. You move toward the thing that scares you, because each of those actions chips away at the cage. That cage is your wiring, and every bold move, every deliberate, unnatural, energy-intensive decision is a hammer. The goal is not to silence fear. The goal is to reassign it. Let fear become your GPS. When it screams, you step. When it trembles, you advance. The louder the resistance, the more important the decision. That's how you recondition your mind. You use its panic as proof. You turn its screams into sirens of opportunity. Biology will always drag you backward, but boldness is the refusal to obey. It's the declaration that evolution will not be dictated by ancient instinct. You are not your impulses. You are not your default settings. You are the one who rewrites the code, one painful keystroke at a time. The old code says conserve. You say conquer. The old code says hesitate. You say initiate. And when those two collide, you don't listen to comfort. You crush it. You train through it, until the dangerous becomes familiar, and the familiar becomes beneath you. That's how you build new wiring. That's how you outgrow the limits etched into your skin at birth. No critic cuts deeper than the voice inside you, because it speaks before the world ever opens its mouth. It wraps itself around your potential like a cage, preloading shame before a single move is made. You think it's wisdom, this voice. You think it's foresight, but it's fear in disguise. Fear wearing your voice, mimicking your tone, pretending it's keeping you safe, when it's actually killing your future in advance. That voice doesn't care about growth. It cares about control. It doesn't want you judged, not because you aren't capable, but because it cannot survive seeing you fail in public, so it convinces you to fail in private instead, to never write the line, never shoot the shot, never speak the truth, and you obey. You betray yourself before the world ever gets the chance to. That's how self-rejection becomes your first sin. Rejection hurts, but silence carves deeper, because rejection is at least the scar of action. Silence is the scar of cowardice. You lie awake at night, not because someone told you no, but because you never asked. You'll never know how far you could have gone, because the internal warden didn't want to risk being laughed at. So it kept you chained, called it protection, and you bought it, because it's easier to avoid judgment than it is to confront the haunting realization that you didn't even try, that you traded rejection from others for abandonment of self. And that kind of abandonment isn't temporary. It echoes, it follows you into every room. Because you know, even if no one else does, that you are not who you could have been. That voice inside you doesn't attack your dreams directly. It sabotages them with hesitation, with small thoughts, with imaginary ridicule. What if you mess up? What will they say? Are you even qualified? It doesn't scream, it suggests. It doesn't command, it plants seeds. Seeds of doubt that grow into full-blown surrender. And by the time you realize it's won, years have passed. Talent rotted in the basement of maybe next time. You've rehearsed every failure in your head without ever living a single one. That's the tragedy. You feared rejection so much, you rejected yourself to avoid it. You were the gatekeeper. You locked the door. The world never even had to. You folded to shadows. And now those shadows own you. You think not showing up protects you, that it keeps you whole. But hiding doesn't preserve you. It erases you, one invisible day at a time. You wake up and carry a name that no one's ever heard. You walk through rooms like wallpaper, because you've mastered the art of staying beneath the line of judgment. But in doing so, you've also fallen beneath the line of influence. People don't reject what they can't see, but they don't respect it either. And that's the price you pay for hiding. You become invisible even to yourself, because every moment you stay silent, another part of you dies unexpressed, another skill fades, another truth goes buried, until what remains is a quiet shell of what if. We reject ourselves to preempt the pain, but in doing so, we ensure something worse, regret. The pain of rejection stings, but the pain of avoidance, it suffocates. It robs you slowly. It makes you doubt your own memory. Was I even capable? Did I really have something? That uncertainty festers, and no amount of comfort, no soft life, no easy day can silence it. Because comfort doesn't erase the knowledge that you gave up before you were denied, that you never tested the world, never made it react. You walked away before you saw how far your presence could bend reality. And now you carry the unbearable burden of potential never activated. That inner voice will always plead for safety. It will say, "Don't try," not because it hates you, but because it fears humiliation more than failure. But greatness requires the risk of looking foolish. You cannot be respected until you are first willing to be ridiculed. You cannot lead until you're willing to be laughed at. And you cannot become legendary until you're willing to be alone on the edge of your own convictions. That voice won't support that path. It will beg you to wait. Wait until you're ready, until you're perfect, until you're guaranteed success. But the dangerous man knows readiness is created, not waited for. And the only way to silence that voice is to drown it in action. Every time you reject yourself, the world breathes a sigh of relief. Because it didn't have to compete with you. It didn't have to contend with what you might have become. You did the world's job for it. That's what self-rejection really is, the ultimate surrender. Not just of action, but of presence. You never entered the ring. You never showed up at the table, so you were never in the game. And in that absence, you became digestible, containable, safe. But deep down, you know you weren't built to be safe. You were built to be felt, to disrupt, to impose. But disruption requires risk, and risk invites rejection. So until you're willing to be seen, you will remain a ghost, alive but irrelevant. You fear judgment because you've forgotten most people are too consumed with their own insecurity to truly judge you. They don't see you the way you fear they do. They see shadows, they project. And yet, you hand over your potential based on their imaginary opinions. You surrender your future to strangers who never even earned the power to shape it. You let the fear of laughter stop you from creating legacy. And that trade, it's unforgivable, because you weren't just quiet. You were complicit, you let fear drive, you let doubt lead. And now your silence has grown roots so deep you call it personality. You want to be free, then show up. Not when it's convenient, not when it's perfect. Now, show up trembling, up uncertain. Show up and risk being wrong. Because rejection is not the enemy, absence is. Rejection teaches, clarifies, it sharpens, but absence, it rots. It leaves nothing to build on. And that voice inside, it will always whisper, "Don't." But you were not built to whisper back. You were built to interrupt it, to override it, and to act anyway, even if your hands shake, even if your voice cracks. Because the man who shows up again and again wins, not just in the world, but in himself. We reject ourselves to dodge the pain of others, but in doing so, we inflict the deepest pain imaginable, the pain of self-betrayal. And that pain does not leave, it watches, waits, until one day you realize the very voice that told you, "Don't try," was the voice that guaranteed you'd never be anything more than background. You weren't born for background, you were born for impact, and impact demands rejection. The wait signal is a lie. It's the false green light your emotions promise if you just hold still a little longer. Wait until you're sure. Wait until you feel ready. Wait until the fear goes quiet, but it never does. Because that signal is a trap. It loops you in safety until safety becomes your identity. You think inaction is neutral. It's not. It's rot in disguise. A clarity is not a prerequisite for action. It's a reward. And every second you delay, you deepen the distance between who you are and who you could have been. Movement births meaning, not the other way around. You think walking into the fog is reckless? No, standing still is. Because the longer you wait, the more the fog becomes a wall. And the more that wall becomes you. Your emotions are designed for safety, not significance. They whisper lullabies of later, in a voice that sounds like wisdom. But fear wears a lab coat now. It sounds analytical. It talks in probabilities and metrics, and you believe it because it pretends to protect you. But protection is not the goal. Presence is. You can't analyze your way into greatness. You act, you move, you bleed, and in the motion of forward momentum, the pieces align. Clarity doesn't walk ahead of you. It follows you. It takes shape through decisions made in discomfort. You want understanding. Then earn it with your feet, not your thoughts. That's the war. Between the man who waits for alignment and the one who generates it. Every empire began with a step that felt premature. Every artist touched the brush before their hands were steady. Every warrior gripped the sword before their mind was calm. That's the nature of greatness. It starts before you feel ready. You take the action first. You walk in, your heart pounding, your thoughts split, your fears screaming. And then comes the silence. Because once motion is triggered, once commitment is declared through movement, the emotion follows. The mind says, "We've decided." And clarity doesn't argue with decision, it respects it. That's what people misunderstand. They think peace is a prerequisite, but peace is a byproduct of confronting the chaos, not dodging it. The man who waits to feel certain before he moves will never leave the shore. He will study the tide, measure the wind, run simulations in his head, and then he will die with dry feet and unfinished plans.